She walked into the room quietly, her clothes plain, her hand slightly trembling as she clutched her worn-out folder. No fancy heels, no designer bag, just a simple woman with tired eyes and a hopeful heart. The room was full of polished shoes, expensive watches, and confident laughter. As she sat down for her job interview, the panel barely looked at her. They chuckled, exchanged glances, and whispered behind their hands. One even smirked and asked, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The woman stayed calm. She answered every question with honesty and grace, even though her voice shook. She wasn't here to impress with titles or appearance. She was here because she believed in her purpose. But the interviewers didn't care. They dismissed her before she could finish. One of them even laughed and said, "Let's move on. We're wasting time." Just as she stood up, holding back tears, the door swung open. Silence filled the room. A tall, well-dressed man walked in. Everyone recognized him instantly, the CEO himself. But instead of heading to the panel, he walked straight to the woman. His face changed the moment he saw her. Without saying a word, he bowed deeply. Gasps echoed through the room. And then, in a voice that made the whole panel freeze, he turned to everyone and said, "You are all speaking to your new chairwoman." The room went completely still. No one knew what to say. Who was this woman, really? What had just happened? And why was the most powerful man in the company showing her such deep respect? What they didn't know was, her story had only just begun. No one dared to move. The same interviewers who had laughed minutes earlier now sat frozen, their faces pale. The woman looked just as stunned, her lips slightly parted, eyes searching the CEO's face for answers. But he simply gave her a gentle nod, as if to say, asterisk, it's okay now, asterisk. Her name was Mira. She had arrived that morning from a small town, carrying only a single change of clothes and years of experience no one had cared to ask about. She wasn't flashy, didn't carry a resume filled with big names. But what she did have was a story most people wouldn't believe. And until this moment, she had no idea how much of that story had quietly shaped the very company she was standing in. The CEO, Mr. Arman Singh, had never forgotten her. Years ago, long before boardrooms and skyscrapers, he was just a struggling young man who had wandered into a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. The owner of that cafe, a warm, sharp woman with a gift for seeing potential in others, was Mira. Back then, she didn't ask for resumes. She gave people chances. She gave asterisk him asterisk a chance. But none of that was known to the panel. All they saw was a woman they had judged based on her simple clothes and quiet presence. They hadn't asked about her background, hadn't cared to hear her ideas. Now they were realizing their mistake, and the weight of it was only beginning to settle in. But what none of them knew was that Mira wasn't just here to take a position. She was about to turn the entire company upside down. And her first decision as chairwoman? It was going to shock everyone in that room. Mira sat quietly at the head of the long conference table now, the same table where she had been humiliated just an hour earlier. The panel members shifted in their seats, avoiding her eyes, their earlier arrogance replaced with unease. No one dared to speak first. Mr. Arman stood beside her, silent, letting the moment sink in. He knew Mira didn't need defending. Her presence alone was enough to challenge every assumption in that room. But behind their polite nods and stiff smiles, not everyone welcomed her return. Especially Rajiv, the senior manager who had led the interview. He'd spent years climbing the corporate ladder and had expected to be named next in line for promotion. Watching Mira walk in and take the highest seat overnight, without warning, without a title, felt like a slap in the face. And he wasn't the only one who felt that way. Whispers had already started across departments. Some admired Mira's quiet strength, calling her the leader the company needed. Others were skeptical, wondering how someone with no recent corporate background could lead a firm this big. The media had caught wind of the unusual appointment, and headlines were swirling. Asterisk unknown woman named chair of multi-million-dollar firm asterisk, and asterisk from humble roots to boardroom power. Who is Mira? Asterisk. Meanwhile, Mira was watching everything. She could sense the silent resistance growing beneath the surface, the guarded smiles, the carefully worded questions. But she didn't flinch. She knew what this company had become, and how far it had drifted from its original values. Her first move would not be easy. Some would call it bold. Others would call it foolish. But one thing was clear. Mira had come not just to lead, but to confront the very system that tried to push her out. And the real battle hadn't even started. The next morning, Mira called for an emergency board meeting. Word spread fast across the company. People whispered in the elevators, shared rumors over coffee, wondering what this simple woman was planning to do next. Even the media camped outside the building, hungry for updates on the mysterious chairwoman who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Inside the boardroom, tension wrapped around every corner like fog. Rajiv and a few senior executives arrived early, faces stiff, papers in hand, ready to challenge her authority. Mira entered without a single note, wearing the same simple clothes, her hair tied back, no assistant trailing behind. She greeted them calmly, sat down, and then, without raising her voice, laid out her proposal. A complete audit of every department, starting with senior management. Eyes widened. Murmurs broke out. Rajiv leaned forward, jaw tight, and asked sharply, on whose authority? She met his gaze without flinching. On mine. The silence that followed was heavy. The audit would expose everything: overspending, false reports, internal politics that had slowly poisoned the company's foundation. People who had built their power on secrets and manipulation were now at risk. Rajiv knew it. Others knew it too. For years, they played the system, rewarded their own circles, and dismissed anyone who didn't fit their mold, including Mira. As the meeting dragged on, challenges came from all sides. Some questioned her leadership. Others tried to delay the audit. But Mira stayed firm, her words steady, her presence unshaken. The deeper she pushed, the more cracks began to show. One executive walked out mid-meeting. Another sat silently, sweat on his brow. And yet, Mira hadn't even revealed the full truth behind her return. Because what she knew, what she had discovered before stepping into that interview, was something that could bring the entire company to its knees. Just when the boardroom had begun to settle into tense silence, Mira reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Rajiv. "You might want to read this before you speak again," she said quietly. Rajiv glanced at the document, his confident expression fading with every line he read. It wasn't just an audit request. It was a signed report from an internal whistleblower. Dated 2 months ago. It detailed years of financial mismanagement, manipulated performance reports, and under-the-table deals. And at the center of it all was him. Gasps broke out. One executive tried to snatch the paper, but Mira already had copies ready. "This report was submitted by your former assistant," she said. "She was fired the same week. No explanation. No exit interview." Her eyes moved across the room. "I've spoken to her." Now the stakes were no longer just about leadership. They were about survival. Rajiv, who had dismissed her, mocked her, now sat completely exposed. But instead of backing down, he stood up. "You think this will scare me?" he said. "You have no real power. The board still decides, and not everyone here wants change." That's when Mira delivered the second shock. "This company isn't just under my leadership," she said. "I'm now its largest shareholder." The room went dead silent. Even Mr. Armin looked surprised. Only a few people knew the shares had quietly changed hands over the past month. She hadn't just come back. She had been preparing for this moment long before anyone even saw her walk through that door. Now everything had shifted. The people who once held power were scrambling, and Mira wasn't finished. What she revealed next would shake the foundation of the company and expose a truth that had been buried for years. The room buzzed with shock. No one spoke. No one moved. Mira stood calmly, letting the weight of her words settle. She had become the company's largest shareholder in silence, buying out old investors who had lost faith in the system, investors who remembered the company's original vision, one she had helped shape years ago before she ever ran that cafe. Rajiv tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. The board members who once stood by him were now looking away, suddenly quiet, their loyalty shifting. It was over for him, and he knew it. Mira leaned forward. "You didn't just try to humiliate me in that interview," she said. "You've spent years turning this company into something it was never meant to be. That ends today." With Mr. Armin's support, the board voted. Rajiv was officially removed, and a new leadership committee was formed, one that reported directly to Mira. The audit would move forward immediately. The employees watching from their screens around the building erupted in cheers. For the first time in years, change didn't feel like a buzzword. It felt real. But just as the meeting wrapped up, Mira turned to Mr. Armin and said, "There's something else." She handed him a second file, one he hadn't seen. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a letter from his own late father. It revealed that years ago, when the company was on the brink of collapse, it was Mira who had stepped in with a quiet loan, disguised through multiple channels to avoid attention. She had saved them once before and walked away without asking for credit. Mr. Armin looked up, eyes wide. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mira gave a soft smile. "Because I wasn't ready then. But now I am." Mr. Armin sat back in his chair, still holding the letter in his hands, eyes heavy with emotion. All this time, the woman they had overlooked, the one they had once quietly owed everything to, had been standing in the background. Mira hadn't just returned to lead. She had come to remind them what real leadership looked like. Not loud, not showy, but honest, steady, and deeply rooted in purpose. Over the next few weeks, changes rolled through the company like a fresh wind. Departments once filled with fear and competition were reshaped with transparency and trust. The whistleblower was rehired, this time as part of Mira's ethics team. New policies were introduced to protect workers, support innovation, and reward integrity, not connections. Slowly, people started believing in the company again. The headlines changed too. Asterisk woman once mocked now leads one of the fastest growing firms asterisk, and asterisk how quiet strength reshaped a broken business. Asterisk. As for Rajiv, he quietly stepped down from the public eye, his exit marked not by scandal, but by a lesson most had already learned. Never judge someone by what you see on the surface. And never underestimate a woman with a clear purpose and a quiet past. One morning, as Mira stood in the lobby, watching employees pour in with fresh energy, someone asked her what kept her going through it all. She smiled gently and said, "They tried to humiliate me, but I knew who I was. That was enough." And with that, she walked away, blending into the same crowd she once stood apart from. Now not just as chairwoman, but as the woman who reminded everyone that humility, patience, and quiet courage could still change the world.